نحمل لكم أطيب التهاني بحلول شهر رمضان المبارك، ونحتفي معاً بعام جديد مفعم بالأمل والتفاؤل. حرصنا على الحفاظ على تقاليدنا في تبادل المعرفة والثقافة والتعلم من بعضنا البعض كان حافزاً لنجدد التلاقي والتواصل معكم. ويستمر مجلس محمد بن زايد هذا العام استضافته نخبة من المحاضرين للحديث عن أبرز القضايا التي تهمنا اليوم وتتناغم مع عام 50، مستلهمين من إرث المؤسسين وقيمهم. نأمل في انضمامكم إلينا عائلة واحدة يجمعها دفء التعايش والمحبة. نرحب بكم في مجلس محمد بن زايد.
My first memory of Abu Dhabi involves education. It was my first trip. We were staying at the Emirates Palace Hotel, and in those days, Saadiyat Island was just a dream. And there was an exhibit at the Emirates Palace Hotel, and I remember walking into that exhibit, and as you turned left to go into the room where the exhibit was, there was a full-face shot of Sheikh Zayed. And underneath it, it said, "The future of our country is the education of our citizens." It was then that I knew I was in the right place. When I met Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed for the first time, I realized that he carried within him that same commitment to education for all and to educating himself. He himself was an incarnation of an ideal that his father had expressed.
النهج اللي اتبعته دولة الإمارات منذ التأسيس كان مبني على التأقلم والتأقلم الدائم، وأساس التأقلم الدائم هو التعلم والتعلم المستمر. كدولة، كقادة، كشعب، دولة مرت في عقود كثيرة من تأسيسها لين وصولنا اليوم إلى عامنا 50. المرحلة المقبلة مرحلة تغيير جذري في طريقة العمل في دولة الإمارات وفي العالم. مرحلة ستتغير علينا المهن بأسرع وتيرة من ما كان عليه في السابق. هذا يعني أن أسلوبنا ونهجنا وطريقة نظرنا للتعليم يختلف.
I think that we should always start with the really fundamental question, meaning what is the purpose of education? And I think that that's a question which we tend to forget way too often. And for me, the essence of education is to help every child flourish in life, no matter what happens. And when you combine that purpose with reality, meaning how does the world look like in 2030, you become in an interesting position, because I think that we can all be relatively certain about one thing, which is that the life in 2030 will be everything else than certain, meaning the uncertainty will be all over the place. It's not a problem if you don't know something that you need to know. The problem is that if you don't believe in yourself that you can learn that topic. And there's another expression for that one, which is called self-efficacy. And I think that we should be trying to create an education ecosystem where kids are gaining trust on their learning abilities, meaning is that no matter what happens in life, I have the capacity to learn new things.
We each are creatures of the divine. Each of us has within us passions, talents, and we've been gifted with those things. Each student is a wonderful gift of creation, and he or she has capacities that have to be brought out by education. The root of the word education, educo, means to lead out, to draw out. And an education has to draw out from each individual what his or her capacities are. Now we do that in a generally uniform way through primary and secondary education. But when we move into college and university, or perhaps to a certificate program for those for whom college and university are not the right path, or an associate degree, which is a little bit more than a certificate program, or perhaps training in a trade after one has finished primary and secondary education. See, here's where we begin to recognize the individuality of people.
المواهب دائما مدعومة بالشغف، والشغف لمهنة أو الشغف للتعلم أو الشغف لزيادة المعرفة في جانب من الجوانب. لله الحمد حظينا نحن بقيادة في دولة الإمارات تؤمن بمواهب الشباب فيها، وتؤمن بخلق فرص في مجالات ما كانت موجودة في الدولة أو في القطاعات المعنية. ترجمت المواهب هاي إلى أرض الواقع، ترجمتها إلى مخرجات نلمسها وتلتمسها دولة الإمارات ويلتمسها اقتصاد دولة الإمارات، مهم جداً في المرحلة المقبلة. هنالك برامج مختلفة بدعم وقيادة دولة الإمارات لصقل المهارات هاي وترجمتها إلى مخرجات تترك بصمة نوعية في تطوير دولة الإمارات. التعليم المستمر هي الخبرات المكتسبة من الأفراد من حولنا، الخبرات المكتسبة من طريقة معاملتنا للتحديات اللي نمر فيها وكيفية التغلب عليها عن طريق زيادة المهارات وزيادة الثقافة وزيادة المعرفة والإدراك بالمحنة اللي احنا فيها.
There's a reason that I admire Sheikh Mohammed and Abu Dhabi so much. And that is that he has always been concerned about the welfare not only of his family and the citizens of his country, but of the world. And he's always thinking decades ahead. And I've seen him with a goodness that is perhaps unique among the leaders I've seen, continue to pursue that long-term goal. And when you think about the topic we're discussing, which is lifelong learning, that's one part of that strategy, because he expects of himself, as I expect of myself, and as we hope to instill in every person we touch, the fact that there's so much possibility and good in the person or ourselves that we're never going to exhaust it. And life is about just getting a little bit better every day.
بدينا العمل بفريق صغير في مسبار الأمل، فريق صغير جداً خاصة في بدايات المشروع في نهاية 2013. كانت فكرة كيفية وصول دولة الإمارات إلى المريخ، ومع مرت سنوات ومع النهج اللي اتبعناه في تطوير هذه المهمة لاستكشاف الفضاء الخارجي، والنهج المختلف عن أي مهمة سابقة راحت إن كانت للمريخ أو راحت لكواكب أخرى في مجموعتنا الشمسية، كانت فيها تحديات كبيرة. كانت فيها تحديات تقنية، أو تحديات تقنية يمكن في أوقات حبست أنفاسنا، وصلتنا حتى لمرحلة هل نقدر ننجز هذا المشروع على الوقت الزمني المحدد؟ هل نقدر نوفي بوعدنا لقيادة دولة الإمارات، نوفي بوعدنا للشعب الإمارات، نوفي بوعدنا لعلماء العالم بوصول هذا المسبار بوقته المحدد إلى كوكب المريخ؟ ولكن التحديات هاي كانت فرصة ذهبية للتعلم. كل ما صعبت علينا وكل ما شفنا أن ما في فرجة لأي تحدي مرينا فيها، إن كانت تحديات تقنية أو كانت تحديات إدارية في المشروع، كل ما شفنا أن في نهاية التحدي هاي بعد ما تغلبنا عليه، التعلم اللي تعلمناه منه، الدروس المستفادة، الخبرة اللي اكتسبناها ما تقدر بأي ثمن.
all the improvements have to be win-win, meaning is that you have to be improving the excellence and the capabilities for learning, but you also have to take care of social emotional learning and holistic well-being. And you cannot sacrifice the latter, because otherwise there will be no lifelong learning. But it doesn't work like this, is that you have the need and you have the solution, and top-down you install the innovation somewhere. Because so much about improving the education is about context, meaning that not every innovation works everywhere. So I think that if you want to be improving soft skills or thinking skills or cooperation skills or lifelong learning skills, you should be analyzing 5-10 different options coming from various countries. You should be discussing together with the teachers, with the students. You should understand what out of these possibilities could work best in your own country. And then you should have patience to implement them extremely well, taking care of the well-being not only of the students, but also of the teachers as well. And I think that way too often we try to force the change way too fast, because if you are trying to push it too much, you might break the education system. And once, for example, you start to be getting more burnouts from the teachers and so on, then you will end up in serious problems.
في مهارتين مهمة جداً للمستقبل والاستدامة العمل في المستقبل لأي فرد من أفراد المجتمع. الأول هو التأقلم، والتأقلم الدائم بناء على الظروف الحالية اللي نمر فيها. والثاني هو طريقة التعلم وإعادة التعلم وإعادة التعلم. فإذا ناخذ النهج أو المنهجية اللي نتكلم عنها، هو the ability to learn, unlearn and relearn. وهذا هو أهم ميزة لازم تكون مزروعة فينا نحن، وهو حب الاستطلاع وحب النظر والتعلم في مجالات مختلفة، وكيفية التأقلم مع الظروف الحالية والتعلم لكل ظرف ولكل مكان. نتأكد نحن كأفراد في مجتمع نكون متكاملين دائما ونخلق فرصنا بنفسنا. انتقلنا من 50 سنة الماضية بالفرص كانت مخلوقة لنا لأن احنا نقدر نبدع فيها، إلى عصر خلق كل شخص للفرص اللي هو موجودة فيها. وهذا اللي نحن نشوف فيها الديسربتيف تشينجز اللي موجودة في المجتمعات، والديسربتيف تشينجز اللي نشوفها في الاقتصاد، واللي تترك بصمة نوعية في نقل دول معينة من لتكون من مصاف الدول العالم.
Education never stops. Just as for me, as I approach the age of 80, it hasn't stopped. And education, whether you go to college or you choose instead to do a certificate program or an associate degree program, or to stop after 4 years, or to go instead to become good at a trade, education can never stop. Because if it stops, two terrible things will happen. Number one, just in a utilitarian sense, society will pass you by. I mean, think of it. The great jobs of tomorrow are not even known to us yet. We have to continue education just to keep advancing as an individual in a society that's in constant change. But quite apart from the utilitarian argument for why lifelong learning is important, it is a kind of moral argument. My great colleague Stephen Holmes once said to me as we sat in the garden of the old campus in Abu Dhabi, he said the great universities of the world were all created to train the national elite, the national leadership of their country. This is the first university in the world that not only does that, but also has been given the mandate to train an integrated global leadership, people who would come literally from the four corners of the earth together to learn to live together and be together, and the excitement of seeing the world through each other's eyes, and then to go back. Yes, some of them would stay in the Emirates, but most of them would go back to their countries. And 15, 20, 25, 30 years later, suddenly this hyper-talented group that had learned to live and love together would be running the great institutions of the world, private and public. They would be the leadership of a global, united civil society.
التعليم المستمر معناته أن الواحد يتخصص في مجال من المجالات ويكون منفتح للمجالات المختلفة. فشخصياً أنا كان عندي ميول كبير في الرياضيات، كان عندي شغف كبير بفهم الرياضيات والفيزياء، ولكن كان أيضاً عندي ميول في الاقتصاد، وأيضاً ميول في السياسة وفي التاريخ. اعتبرتهم مواد مكملة لبعض، أعطتني نظرة لطريقة تفكير وطريقة استنتاج إن كان اللي يستوي في الماضي، أو ما هي العوامل الكثيرة اللي تأثر على الاقتصاد، وما هي العوامل السياسية اللي تأثر أيضاً في تطوير التكنولوجيا، بالإضافة إلى الرياضيات والفيزياء اللي أيضاً أعطتني نظرة لعلم من العلوم اللي متواجدة هناك والمكملة لحياتنا اليومية.
Whenever we are discussing about trying new things, developing education, the question that is almost always asked is that how can we know that this works? But the problem is that also outside of the school, we are moving towards the world where we never can be certain if something works or not. And if something doesn't work, it doesn't mean that there's no learning happening. So I think that it's really fundamental that we are changing the mindset in education towards risk-taking, and also we have to be improving our capacity to tolerate things that don't work, because that's the way we will learn. That's the essence of the workplace also in the 2030s.
اليوم نحن نعيش واقع وين العالم كله والمعرفة كلها اللي اكتسبتها البشرية على مر قرون موجودة في هواتفنا النقالة. أي علم، أي معرفة، أي سؤال يحيرنا، أي معلومة أو أي شيء يمر علينا ما عندنا فهم عميق فيه، نقدر نبحث وندور ونطالع لوجهات نظر مختلفة من حول العالم، وكل هذا في دقائق. ونشوف التغيير هذا على أبنائنا اليوم. كلنا ننولد علماء كأطفال، واليوم الأطفال وعيالنا محظوظين بالعالم اللي عايشين فيه، اللي التكنولوجيا له أثر إيجابي فيه. فأسئلتهم، أسئلة كيف وليش والاستكشافات اللي يمرون فيها، لهم أثر كبير في شخصياتهم الحالية. وهذا يجعلني أتفائل بأن المستقبل مليء بالتحديات، ولكن المستقبل وأبنائنا وأبناء المستقبل يقدرون يتغلبون على هالتحديات بالمعرفة اللي يكتسبونها اليوم. وصلنا لدرجة أن نقدر نصمم مسبار لاستكشاف فضاء خارجي، وكيفية أخذ النهج هذا لتطبيقه على قطاعات مختلفة، خاصة نحن اليوم في دولة الإمارات ننظر إلى تأسيس قطاعات صناعية ريادية مبنية على التكنولوجيا المتقدمة، مبنية على تطوير التكنولوجيا المتقدمة، وهذا في حاجة إلى استغلال المهارات كلها، استغلال التعليم المستمر بشكل فعال، وأيضاً أخذ المعرفة من الغير وانخراطها في مجتمع دولة الإمارات، ليكون لنا نقلة نوعية في تأسيس قطاعات لم تكن موجودة في السابق في دولة الإمارات.
When you are trying to improve education ecosystems, there's one aspect which is really interesting and really complicated, and that's the issue or the balance between excellence and equity. Many people who I really admire have said that creating a one great school is actually not that difficult. We all know is that what are the skills one need, what kind of teachers have massive amount of resources on technology and so forth. But the key challenge is how to make that happen in each and every school of the country.
So I applaud the fact that, as usual, the United Arab Emirates, Abu Dhabi, have focused on the importance of lifelong learning. Because lifelong learning is really the actuation of the gift of life. And it creates for us a beautiful symphony created by all the piano notes we come to play.
السلام عليكم.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته.
عليكم السلام.
مبروك عليكم الشهر، وإن شاء الله هالأيام تكون أيام مبروكة لكم وللعالم أجمع. موضوع لا شك أنه شيق اليوم ولها أبعاد لكل واحد منا كمجتمع، كأفراد، كمسؤولين، كأولياء أمور. الكل واحد منا متشوق حقيقة يستمع لتجاربكم. كل واحد منكم اليوم يأتي بتجربة في غاية الأهمية، تجربة حياتية طويلة متنوعة شيقة، وأتمنى أن اليوم تستطيعون أنكم تلبون إعجابنا بكم، إعجابنا بتجربتكم، وتحفيزنا المزيد. لا شك أن اليوم التعليم ما أصبح ضرورة للحصول على عمل أو الحصول على مهارة، ولكن الحصول على حياة متنوعة وحياة نستطيع أن نتعامل معها بطريقة تحفزنا، لكن أيضا بطريقة تزيد من معرفتنا مع بعض، تزيد من معرفتنا لمجتمعاتنا، وتزيد من شغفنا للمعرفة. فأهلا فيكم جميعا، وأتمنى لكم حياة موفقة. أيضا أتمنى أنكم تكونون محفزين الكل واحد منا، الكل مستمع المجلس الشيخ محمد بن زايد اليوم، ويمكن بعد ذلك بطرح عليكم بعض الأسئلة. Dr. Sexton, you've been an old partner, a friend of the UAE. I've had the pleasure of meeting you in different places in New York, in Abu Dhabi, but also from different perspectives of you knowing us, you knowing the Emirates. I would really like to know how can you figure out and encourage others to create passion in learning. You're a passionate human being, which I admire. Give us a few lessons on that.
Well, first of all, Your Highness, it's wonderful to see you again, and I miss so much being able to be there in person and to visit regularly. For 12 years, every 2 weeks, I would come to teach, and passion runs deep. The passion that I see in a country I've come to love, and in Abu Dhabi in particular, the passion for a future of a united world that is foreshadowed in the city itself and in NYU Abu Dhabi's student body, for example. Today we talk about passion in specific for lifelong learning. And I will just say to you, as I reflected on this, I realized my own life, this is my 61st year of teaching. 61 years in the classroom. I began teaching at the age of 17. That was my passion. That was going to govern the rest of my life. There was never any question that I would do anything else. Now, how did that happen? And what were its manifestations as I've reflected for our conversation today? The contribution I would like to make most is when we speak about lifelong learning, we have to think of it in two ways, not one. There's an outward-looking way, which is very practical, having to do with how you function positively in an ever-changing world. And then there's an inward-looking way, very personal, having to do with how we build for ourselves lives of joy and fulfillment. For me, those two things have come together. That's a blessed life, when you can contribute to the world and be useful in society and go through all the changes at the same time as you do something that is joyful and fulfilling for you every day. But I would say to you, the way to begin to think about building a passion for lifelong learning is to think about it the way great athletes think about building capacity in their sport. This is just learning as sport, and that is build muscle memory. Build muscle memory. It starts in the family. I'm the proud grandfather of a 1-month-old child. My daughter is already reading to him. He can't understand the words, but he's associating his mother's voice with the joy of reading. They'll build for him family games. They'll give him learning as a reward for good behavior. This is all very early on, building muscle memory. And that's in the family. So we have to start there. And then that has to be reflected in public policy. The availability of quality early childhood education, primary education, and then later on the availability of extracurricular activities for the children, especially those that foster creativity. Modeling by the leaders that learning goes on for life. The Ramadan Lectures themselves, which I've attended, and this is part of, are an example of that. Because they're people with the busiest schedules in the world. His Highness Sheikh Mohammed, you sit and you learn. That's modeling great behavior for every citizen of the Emirates. All this builds muscle memory. And then there are ways to translate that through formal and informal policy, making sure that now on the formal level, we have to make sure there's an alignment between the passions of the citizens, because people do things better when they're passionate about it, the passions of the citizens and the needs of society. So you have to give people, you can't assume everybody has the same passion. So you have to give people choices that can indulge different parts and encourage them to come in and become productive. And that requires generally formal programs, not necessarily university degrees or advanced degrees. It could be certificate programs, training, whatever. But then the informal parts are just as important. Providing to everybody. I was very, very impressed that one of the first things that you and your family asked NYU to do before we opened NYU Abu Dhabi was create the NYU Abu Dhabi Institute, which had 40 events a year, appealing to the intellect. No degree, but it was a place for people to go for stimulation, lifelong learning. So it's a complex picture, yes. It's a complex picture, but it starts with muscle memory built from the beginning, and those then goes through formal and informal structures. And as long as you set a high expectation for people and say, we want you to excel in that about which you are passionate, and you give them the tools to do it, my experience is people will rise to it, people of all levels.
And Doctor, does that actually differ between people who are in need and not? I mean, get them excited, get them interested, or even get them to do more. I mean, how can you do that in different societies with who have and have not, younger and older populations? It obviously differs, and there are different techniques, but what would the thing that comes to your mind for us, for knowing the UAE, how can we make people a bit more interested, a bit more fired up?
You show your wisdom with that question. Let me start with an analogy from the United States, my own country, because I've been deeply involved in trying to keep education going here in the United States at all levels, but focus for the moment on primary and secondary education, because that's where the base for everything is built and the curiosity for everything is built. So many of the poorest students during this COVID crisis have been unable to participate because they don't have the capacity to do learning from home because they have no Wi-Fi, or they have no computers, or they have no place privately to study. All of these things are unavailable to them. So I think what is missing in my country is government coming in and providing a platform of opportunity for everyone. Because you can have all the passion in the world, and if you cannot access meaningful indulging of that passion. So this is one thing that I believe the UAE has the capacity to show to the world. And that is that blessed as you are with great leadership and great resources, you will provide a platform so that everybody has the access, and then you will stimulate them. So how do you light the fire? Well, you can't expect a family that doesn't have the joy of education in the mother and the father to light that fire. So that's where you have to have volunteers and teachers who are willing to work with the children. You have to have local activities that bring the children in through informal programs, and then begin to teach them as they learn whatever it is, be it how to play soccer or how to make music or how to take photography. Sponsored in part by the UAE, some of the work that I've been doing has been in the refugee camps, for example, in Turkey, Lebanon, and Jordan, working with people who have no hope, but simply going in with programs with Major League Soccer, for example, or with a photography program run by one of my former students, or with an art program. All of a sudden you could see the light of passion in their eyes, and then you use that to bring them to the classroom. So I think it has to be a pervasive effort, and modeling by leadership is really important. Having had that little ember lit begin to inflame their passions, then you meet them with programs formal and informal.
Sarah, your career, your life in the UAE, abroad, gives you so much experience. I'd really like to hear your thoughts, and if you'd like to follow up on what we heard Dr. Saxon just saying.
Assalamu alaikum, طويل العمر. I would actually like to follow up on what Dr. Saxon said. It resonated very well on a lot of things that we've lived by, and he mentioned something that is very core and intrinsic to lifelong learning. And that starts at the first institution that we all belong to, and that's the institution that we are born into, the home. And it's that passion that is created within households, that ability to learn, linking education and an inquisitive mind to passion, and linking it not only to what you learn in school, but everything around you, everything you touch, you feel, everyone you speak to, every book you touch, every individual that's in your life becomes part of your learning experience. And this is the foundation of lifelong learning. And as Dr. Sexton mentioned, opportunity is what got us where we are today. I have been blessed with great opportunities for me to utilize my passion and work in. The tools are there. Working on a program that I never ever thought that was a dream that I was able to dream, and having leadership that always dares to create visions that are transformative in their nature and that are challenging at the same time, so that we can utilize the passion that we have in us and the opportunity that's given to us for us to be able to be vital parts of society. And at the end of the day,
This is what we all are here on Earth. The more I learned about space, the more I saw planets, the more I learned about galaxies, the more I realized how small our planet is and how small the intricate system of the planet that we live in is. And it gives us an even further rooting on what it means to leave a mark on this world and to leave a mark on the only world that we know has life on it.
Having someone like Mr. Timmerman here is very interesting because of not only his experience on this topic, but also his media background. I had the pleasure of dealing with many years ago. Your experience, sir, I mean, in media, in business, in creativity, how do you see us going, a world which went through a pandemic, at a point where people were very frustrated, not knowing what would the outcome be, but pulling out of it, of this pandemic very quickly, faster than any time ever scientists have done that. How can we reflect this into more interest in making people like Sarah and so many other scientists in the Emirates and around the world, and especially in the Arab world, at a time where people are challenged with pandemics, with lack of opportunity in this part of the world? So how would you try to encourage the rest of us here?
Okay, so first of all, what I would love to say is that if I'm thinking about education in general, I would say that the main purpose of education is to help every child flourish in life, no matter what happens. And I think that the life we are sort of like looking at the 2030s and so on is going to be an extremely uncertain one. And how I'm approaching what has been happening during the past 12 months, 18 months, is that partly this has been a massive challenge, but partly this has also been a masterclass on uncertainty. And I think that it's interesting to see is that how do the education ecosystems in general face this challenge. And I think that, for example, in Finland, there's been a lot of examples where many schools have been actually flourishing, and they think that this is a beautiful, beautiful chance to be teaching things like growth mindset, creativity, empathy, and so on. And I think that one of the big challenges in education ecosystems at the moment globally is that whenever there's a new innovation or you are trying something new, we want to be certain is that how do we know whether this works or not? But the problem is that if we are thinking about the life in 2030, you never know what works and not. And I think that kids are learning a tremendous amount of things which did not work. And I think that we should be encouraging those as well. But when you are thinking about human mind and the curiosity in general, I think that you always have to keep in mind is that human being is a fascinating and holistic person. So I think that in education, we should be paying huge amount of attention to holistic well-being as well. Meaning is that kids, they have to have mental skills, they have to have academic skills, they have to be able to cope with stress, cope with uncertainty, cope with anxiety, and so on. Because it's complicated to be teaching creativity if you are an extremely anxious person at the same time. And being able to cope with stress in an uncertain world is not a simple challenge at all. But I see this as a chance to be creating a new version of education which will be an extremely valuable one in the future.
So, sir, you were talking about children, and some of us who are parents, I'm sure, have went through a different kind of challenge with their kids during this situation. How can we be better parents? by doing so? I mean, how can we make sure that this challenge can be reflected on all of us down the road in a better way?
Your Highness, I really love the question because it's kind of like fundamental for flourishing and happiness and so forth. And I think that when we are analyzing kids, they are learning huge amount of things from their parents as well. So if you want to be teaching a growth mindset, it's fundamental that we as parents have a growth mindset as well. And how do you get that one? I think that we need to be approaching challenges like this from a positive and optimistic point of view. We should be having what I call practical hope. And what I mean by practical hope is that we don't think that everything will be without problems in the future. What we think is that there will be a massive amount of problems, challenges in the future as well, but we can find a way to cope with those. And I think that as parents, we should have positive, optimistic worldview, and we should not be complaining too much about challenges like this, but we should kind of like try to move that kind of approach to life to the next generation as well. And it's not simple, but I think that it's crucial, because if the parents at home are complaining about the challenges day in, day out, I think that the kids will be learning that from the parents as well.
So should we complain and share or not with kids? Should we share our thoughts and our experiences or not? And what are the limits there?
It's a really good question. And what is my take is that we should not be lying to kids. And I think that we should even trust kids. I think that they are really good at coping with things as long as we explain them. And how I would be approaching, how I try to approach my kids and how I'm discussing with teachers as well, is that you would say is that it's not a bad thing to have problems in life. It's not a bad thing to have challenges, because life is full of challenges and so on. How we should be approaching is more like having a self-efficacy, meaning is that no matter what happens in the future, I have the skills inside myself to be solving those. So I would be discussing about problems, challenges, whether it's global warming or pandemic or whatever. I would be speaking about them actually quite openly and saying is that it will be uncertain in the future, but you and I, we as human beings, we will find a way to survive and we will find a way to flourish and so on. So I would trust kids and I would say is that, you know, let's be optimistic, let's find a way to enjoy uncertainty. And it's a really complicated task, but I think that it's fundamental in the fast-changing world.
Amran, we are so very proud of you, your team, what you've accomplished. It's just a nice way of raising what you've all achieved with the Hope mission. And it's challenging in a normal time. It's obviously more challenging to do it during a lockdown and a world lockdown. So how have you managed to reflect what you've known, what you've learned, and what you are learning along the way to make your mission even more of a success?
Assalamu alaikum, طويل العمر. Excellent question, Your Highness. And nothing about this mission was easy since day one. And the nice thing about this mission, it reflects the mindset and the culture of the leadership within the UAE. Since day one, the requirements that were set for the team were quite challenging. It pushed us out of our comfort zone. And the foundation to be able to actually tackle this challenge was learning and education. I'm proud to say that more than 90% of the team members in the Emirates Mars mission actually are graduates from schools and universities within the UAE. We had a team that was based in the UAE, a second team that was based in Colorado, a third one that was actually traveling back and forth between the UAE and the US. So this was part of the learning experience. And we had, like, the number of team members that worked on the mission was about 450 people. 200 Emiratis, 150 from our knowledge transfer partners at the universities, and 100 subcontractors. All worked under one umbrella, the Emirates Mars mission umbrella, as one team, one identity. And then when it came to the pandemic, as you mentioned, Your Highness, it was something that we did not expect. We did not see this coming. We put all the different scenarios for different kind of risks, for different worst case scenarios, but the pandemic was not part of that. And then we have our risk manager here, Mohsen, actually was one of the active team members in managing the risks. And we were able to identify this risk early on. Why? Because the culture within the team, the culture within the UAE is set around tackling challenges and actually operating under worst case scenario before actually the world started shutting down. And that risk-taking attitude towards challenges is also the reason why we're able to actually deliver the mission, regardless of the lockdowns and the challenges that the team had to face in a very short time frame, like 6 years compared to other nations that usually deliver such missions in 10 to 12 years and with a very limited budget. And again, that culture that's based on learning, that's based on education, that's based on measured risks, educated risks, and that's why we're able to tackle all these different challenges that we had within this mission.
Dr. Saxton, if I may just go back to you on what Imran just mentioned in terms of using space to be a catalyst for a generation. Back in the 50s and the 60s, the United States went through that. But that drive did not continue in the same strength it did back then in the States. Do countries get tired? Do countries get tired of being more creative and trying to achieve more?
Your questions are so good. You bring me to this wonderful concept. I loved it as it was articulated, of practical hope. And as it was so eloquently explained, it's attractive. I want to make an argument, not against that at all, but in favor as well of what I'll call impractical hope, because sometimes it's important that we take on what seems to be the unattainable. And there's a way in which the Emirati Mars mission, the whole enterprise now with AI, the notion of by 2071, this tiny country being the most admired country in the world by its 100th anniversary, all these things in some ways, people would say, you can't do them, you can't do them. And I think that both when John Kennedy called America to go to the moon and when the Emirates announced it was going to Mars, it was not only a statement of commitment to tremendous science and intellectual achievement, but it was a metaphor for all we're talking about here today, where you take that now to each individual, and starting with the parental unit. You know, there's one thing that parents can give to their children, no matter how deprived the situation of the family is, and that is unqualified love and confidence and hope for that child. And if in addition to the gift of being in this society, which is a hopeful society built on family, if in addition to that, you've been given the gift of intelligence, which had nothing to do with earning. You were given it, and you were given the gift of love, then you have an obligation to pay that forward and to see that the next 50 years, and that's what lifelong learning is about. It never ends. I'm about to get to my 80th birthday, and I'm still learning. This morning, as I took my 10,000 steps, I listened to my podcasts, and I learned things I didn't know before. The very act of going to the Emirates was for me a learning experience and is every time I go. So I think there's a danger in every society of hope fatigue. But one of the lessons the Emirates can give the world is no hope fatigue here, please. We're going to elevate hope and we're going to universalize it. It's not just going to be for the few.
Sako, how can we cope with failure?
Again, a really fundamental question. There's a beautiful book called Innovation Paradox, and the essence of that book is that how do you become successful is that you take risks. But what happens when you become successful is that you want to remain successful, and as a result you start avoiding risks. So you kind of like start to avoid things that made you successful. And I think that that's what happens with many of the companies. Finnish company Nokia is a great example of that one. So what I would say is that I've been trying to take the whole concept of failure away from my own life. What I'm trying to do is that I try to live my life so that I try many things and I accept in advance that not all of them work, because not everything have to work. And you can learn something extremely valuable also from the things that did not work. Actually, many successes are born out of the failures and so on. So I'm not worried about failures at all. I'm excited about them because I'm confident that in most of the cases they will lead into something extremely valuable.
For me, it's always an honor to be with you all, not only with successful minds, but with hopeful minds. Even the ones who are capable of cherishing failure. We live in an area, in a region which is full of excitement, full of challenges, no doubt. And I really hope that each one of you keep on filling us with joy, with hope, but also how we can embrace whenever we fall on our faces, and by the way, we have to laugh about that too. So there's no problem in that. But let's stand up all together and make sure that what a wonderful journey of COVID the world has been through. I mean, with its challenges, but human beings are just an amazing creation which will never stop and keep on working as long as we're working together. God bless you all. Have a wonderful day. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you very much, Your Highness.
Thank you, Your Highness.
Thank you.
50% من المهمات اللي تم إرسالها لاستكشاف المريخ فشلت. يوم في 2014 أعلن صاحب السمو الشيخ خليفة وصاحب السمو الشيخ محمد إن بنوصل المريخ قبل 2 ديسمبر 2021. كان أمامنا فقط 6 سنوات لتنفيذ المهمة، لأن فرصة الإطلاق إلى المريخ تأتي مرة كل 2 سنين. هذا كان تحدي. الدول الثانية مشاريع نفس هاي ينفذونها في فترة زمنية بين 10 سنوات إلى 12 سنة.
مشروع الإمارات لاستكشاف المريخ هو أول مشروع لاستكشاف الفضاء الخارجي، فكان في وايد أشياء لازم نتعلمها وكان مجال جديد علينا.
كانت البداية نشتغل على أبحاث علمية تخص كوكب المريخ عشان نجهز الفريق العلمي خاصة الإماراتي أن يكونون قادرين على تحليل البيانات العلمية في مهمة المسبار الأمل.
الفكرة العلمية طبعاً كانت واضحة من بداية المشروع أن كيف ممكن هذا المشروع يجاوب على أسئلة ما كانت مجاوبين عليها من قبل، بس كان واضح أن أيدي إماراتية لازم تكون موجودة في هذا المشروع.
بدينا برنامج مع الباحثين والخبراء في مجال علوم المريخ بحيث أن نحن نتعلم من عندهم، لأن واحد من الأهداف الأساسية في المشروع اللي هو نقل الخبرات ونقل المعرفة في مجال علوم الفضاء بشكل عام وبشكل خاص علوم المريخ.
أنا مهندس طيران، دارس هندسة طيران. بالنسبة لي أنا يعني حلمت إني أكون طيار، حلمت إني أكون مهندس طيران، كنت أعرف عن رائد الفضاء، كنت أعرف عن مشاريع الفضاء، لكن هذا ما كان حلم بالنسبة لي لأنه كان أبعد من الحلم.
خلال 6 سنوات لازم أبني قدرات في دولة الإمارات، إماراتيين يبنون مهمة لاستكشاف الفضاء الخارجي، مو فقط يعني مهمة تقنية، لا، أنتم نفس الفريق اللي لازم يقود عملية خلق أثر في جميع القطاعات الأساسية في الدولة لبناء اقتصاد معرفي تنافسي.
كل شيء كنت أسويه في هذا المشروع كان لأول مرة، أتعلم وأطبق على طول، فكان المجال إني أغلط كان لازم يكون أقل ما يمكن. لكن دائما كانوا يذكرونا أن النجاح هو الفريق اللي يكتسب العلم هذا، الفريق اللي يتعلم كيف نبني مسبار، كيف ممكن نكتشف الفضاء الخارجي.
قيادة دولة الإمارات كانت توجيهاتها جدا واضحة لنا، قالوا لنا تبنونه ما تشترونه، ادخلوا في برنامج نقل المعرفة، تعلموا من الغير، لا تبدوا من الصفر. الصاروخ الإطلاق نحن استعملناه صاروخ ياباني، لكن مهمة هذا الصاروخ تنتهي ساعة بعد الإطلاق، عقبها نستعمل نظام الدفع اللي طوره فريق مسبار الأمل، وهذا النظام طورناه ما اشتريناه.
نظام الدفع في مسبار الأمل هو نظام الدفع كيميائي نستخدم في الهيدروزين، فكنت أقدر أستخدم بعض اللي تعلمته من الجامعة، لكن في طبعاً جوانب عدة في هالنظام كانت جديدة كلياً علينا. أنجزنا، لكن في إنجازات وايد قدامنا.
وتعلمنا من من هذه التجربة أن الإنسان إذا حط هدف حتى لو ما كانت عنده المعرفة أنه يقدر يوصل اللي يبغيه.
نحن بدينا في شيء معقد كان، لكن بيعتبر شيء بسيط في المستقبل، وإن شاء الله الأجيال القادمة بينفذون أشياء وايد معقدة وأصعب عن هذا، وإن شاء الله نحن نفتخر فيهم إن شاء الله وقتها.
مسبار الأمل يعد خطوة للبداية. اليوم القيادة الرشيدية أطلقوا أكثر من مبادرة صنع في الإمارات، ومبادرة دعم الصناعة في الإمارات 300 مليار، مبادرة الثورة الاقتصادية الرابعة. التطور قادم ويتطلب همة من الشباب والشابات في الإمارات.
المسبار جاهز للإطلاق. 2 1 إطلاق.
وقت الوصول يعني كانت مرحلة صعبة، مرحلة فيها يعني جزء من التوتر والخوف، ولكن في نفس الوقت يعني من الثقة والفرح. من الفريق عرف أن صاحب السمو الشيخ محمد بن راشد وصاحب السمو الشيخ محمد بن زايد والقيادة في دولة الإمارات كانوا كلهم متواجدين في مقر مركز محمد بن راشد بالفضاء قبل وصولنا في مدار المريخ بنجاح. الرسالة اللي بالنسبة لنا كانت أن بغض النظر شو النتيجة اليوم، نحن بنتواجد معاكم وبنشكركم وبندعمكم.
مبروكين على المريخ والتاريخ. مبروكين يا شباب، اللي حققتوه شرف لكم ولأهلكم ولبلادكم ولأمتكم. أبارك لحكام دولة الإمارات، أبارك لشعب دولة الإمارات الوفي المخلص اللي اليوم فرحته ما توصف.
هذه كانت رسالة مو فقط لفريق عمل المشروع، ولكن كانت رسالة للشباب الإماراتي كلهم، إن الفرص موجودة والقيادة تدعمكم إلى نهاية المطاف. بغض النظر شو النتيجة، هذه كلها جزء من رحلة التعلم وجزء من قصة بناء دولة الإمارات.
ما ننسى صورة الشيخ زايد، وهذا التاريخ يذكرنا به اليوم. سنة الحياة يا عيال، جيل يسلم الراية الجيل والحياة تمشي. هو بداها وانتم وصلتوا، الحمد لله.